Chapter 212. Seeing her coming out of the inner hall, Shuangshi kept looking inside. After looking around for a long time, Xin Yueji became impatient and patted her head. "What are you doing?" Shuangshi covered her head aggrievedly. "Your Highness, you're too bold. If I hadn't dutifully kept watch outside for you, what if someone who's not afraid of death broke in and saw your Highness and the Prince Regent?" She couldn't help but tease her. "Don't think too much. It's not what you see." Shuangshi curled her lips disapprovingly and chuckled. "Don't worry, your Highness. I'm the most loyal to you. When I return to the General's mansion, I won't tell Madam and the General about it." Hearing this, Shun Yueji's face darkened completely. "You still want to tell them?" Realizing what she had said, Shuangshi quickly covered her mouth and swore. No, your Highness, don't get me wrong. I didn't mean that. I've prepared breakfast for you. It'll be ready soon. Your Highness, I'll go get some water to help you wash up." While Shun Yueji was wiping her face, she saw the man coming out with messy clothes. When she saw Shuangshi's expression, her mouth twitched. She didn't have time to speak. "Your Highness, I've only got a basin of water for washing your hands and face. After you wash your face, you can use it." Hearing this, Imo Wushang nodded his head and looked back at her with an appreciative gaze. All right. Because he had knelt for an entire night, if one did not look closely, his posture when he walked out was no different from normal. However, Shuangshi was a busybody. She had been staring at him, so naturally, she saw the man's movements. She secretly patted her head. The regent must have been in one posture for too long, so his walking posture was a little strange. Alas, why didn't he change his posture with Her Highness? For example, Her Highness sitting on top? Ahem. Shin Yueji took a sip of tea absent-mindedly. When she saw Shuangshi's wretched expression, she suddenly coughed hard. Seeing this, Imo Wushang frowned and hurriedly walked in front of her, patting her back. "Your Highness, are you okay?" Shuangshi, who did not know how sinful she was, looked at her worriedly. Shin Yueji rolled her eyes at her and said in annoyance, "When did His Majesty say we should depart?" "Oh, His Majesty said that he would come to Nyangyang's place after morning court." After morning court? Shin Yueji was shocked and instinctively pushed the man behind her away. She looked out of the hall. The sky was about to brighten, and it wasn't too late for Feng Juqing to arrive. She was just about to say something to chase Imo Wushang away. "Don't worry, your ladyship. After the morning court session, His Majesty still has to make a trip to the imperial study. He has to give some instructions on some matters that he won't be in court for the next few days. I reckon that by the time he really arrives, the sun will already be high in the sky." Shin Yueji let out a long breath and glanced at Shuangshi. She complained, "Can't you just say everything in one go? I didn't prepare a lot of things, just a few sets of clothes." "Yes, your Highness." Shuangshi responded respectfully, then turned around and went into the inner hall to prepare. In the blink of an eye, only she and Imo Wushang were left in the huge Phoenix Perch Palace. In the quiet air, it was so quiet that even the drop of a needle could be heard clearly. She could feel the man's gaze on her, and she couldn't ignore it. Chapter 213. I'm not in a hurry. Imo Wushang found a seat close to her and sat down. He naturally reached out to take the teacup she had just drunk and took a sip. He turned a blind eye to her cold gaze. "What if you don't leave and the Emperor suddenly comes back and sees you?" The man's hand holding the teacup paused, and his cold, handsome face was as indifferent as a block of ice. "Are you so afraid of being seen by him?" "Of course. It's good to have an affair with a man, but I'm his woman in name now. I don't want the Shin family to be implicated because of my bad reputation. Have you thought about where to go during the few days you return to the mansion? You don't have to worry about things after returning to the mansion, do you? I haven't seen father and mother for several months. I'll stay in the mansion for a few more days and talk with them. Where else can I go?" The man frowned for a long time. "Aren't you going to go somewhere else?" The man's words made Shin Yueji unhappy. "That's my own business. What does it have to do with you?" A bad feeling arose spontaneously. Looking at the man's handsome and peerless facial features, she suppressed the bad feeling in her heart. "Do you still drink tea, Regent?" Looking down at the empty teacup, Imo Wushang shook his head. Taking the teacup from his hand, Shin Yueji glared at him. If you don't drink tea, leave quickly. The man didn't move. Shin Yueji gritted her teeth. Imo Wushang stared at her for a while, looking delicate and pitiful. I haven't eaten yet. Shin Yueji, the Prince Regent's mansion is not far from the Imperial Palace. If the Prince Regent feels hungry, why don't you go back to your Prince Regent's mansion directly? The ladies in your mansion may already be waiting for you to come in person. Shin Yueji's words made Imo Wushang feel dissatisfied. There are no women in my mansion? Who are you kidding? Shin Yueji sneered. Not long ago, I heard from a servant in the palace that a minister in the court had given you no less than 10 stunning beauties. Not only did the regent not refuse, but he also took all of them into his pocket. Hearing this, Imo Wushang's pitch-black eyes suddenly revealed a faint smile. He pulled Shin Yueji's fair hand and pulled her into his arms. He bit her ear and said, I gave them all to Feng Juqing. Shin Yueji. Startled, she stood up from his body. What did you say? Indeed, Feng Juqing didn't refuse anything that came to him. No matter if he liked it or hated it, so long as it was a gift from others, he would accept it all. The man looked at her seriously. In my house, only you are the hostess. The man's words of love made Shin Yueji a little bit tempted, but her current focus was not on this, but the 10 beauties sent into the palace by him. Do you know that the more beauties there are in the harem, the harder it is for me to fight for favor? The man didn't think much of it. You don't need to fight for favor. You just need to spoil me. Shin Yueji gritted her teeth and swallowed. Only then did she realize that if this man was thick-skinned, she really couldn't deal with him. She picked up a pastry and stuffed it into his mouth. The man obediently opened his mouth and gently licked her fingers that were about to reach back. It was itchy and numb. Chapter 2:14. Regardless of whether he could eat it or not, she stuffed the pastries on the plate into the man's mouth one by one. If he couldn't eat it, he would spit it out. After spitting it out, Imo Wushang continued to take the pastries she stuffed into his mouth. Shin Yueji glanced at him speechlessly. What a scheming trick. After a few rounds, Shin Yueji was like a deflated ball and admitted defeat. Regent, it's getting late. You should go back quickly. I have to take a bath and freshen up later. I'll be with you. The word, together, reminded her of the man's tyranny last night. Shin Yueji blushed, turned away, and gritted her teeth. Get lost. A pair of big hands encircled her from behind and whispered, Gee-er. What? Shin Yueji answered impatiently. Kiss me. Not getting a response from her, Imo Wushang pestered her tirelessly. His voice was hoarse with a hint of expectation. Kiss me and I'll leave. You said that? After calming down for a long time, Shin Yueji gritted her teeth. She didn't know how many times she had been kissed by him. However, if kissing him could really make this eyesore go away, it would not be a loss for her. Yes. After receiving his response, Shin Yueji turned around and stared at his peerlessly handsome face for a while. She let out a long sigh, leaned over, and kissed him on his fair cheek. The man didn't move, but frowned unhappily. I want to kiss you. Shin Yueji put on a fake smile and repeatedly comforted herself in her heart. Bear with it for a while. So, she tiptoed again and kissed the man's sexy thin lips. Just as she was about to leave, her waist was locked by the man. Even the back of her head was inserted into her hair bun by the man's 5 fingers, deepening the lingering and ambiguous kiss that was full of the breath of the couple. The tip of his tongue slid in nimbly, rolling the fragrance and sweetness in her mouth. Shin Yueji didn't dare to move and let the man kiss her. The kiss was passionate and passionate. She was gradually out of breath from the kiss, but she was like a fool, trapped in the man's arms until the man's hand was disobedient on her waist and slowly moved up. The touch on her chest made her shiver, and she abruptly came back to her senses and pushed the man away. She wiped her mouth and pointed in the direction of the Phoenix Perch Palace's main hall's exit. Keep your word and get lost. Imo Wushang looked deeply at her and then at the exit of the hall. His dark eyes were wrapped in a layer of smile. Then, a gust of cold wind in the black brocade robe brushes her face. Shin Yueji's vision darkens. but the man's heavy wet kiss falls on her face. Before she left, the man's words echoed in her ears. When I come to find Jier, I never enter through the main hall. I always enter through the window. Shuangxi came out with a pile of packed parcels in her arms. Your Highness, I suddenly realized. Shen Yueji was in the middle of cleaning her mouth. When she heard what she said, she subconsciously swallowed the water in her mouth with a gulp. Her face darkened. Realized what? Your Highness's clothes in the mansion can occupy half of the general's mansion. These clothes are custom-made for you by general's wife and young master. There are countless clothes. Your Highness doesn't need to bring clothes back at all. Chapter 2:15. Isn't it bad to let others talk? She calmly took a bite of the pastry and said, Oh, I understand. His Majesty has arrived. The sudden report made Shen Yueji almost choke on the pastry. Shuangxi was shocked and quickly patted her back. Your Highness, are you okay? Don't worry, the regent has left. The Emperor won't find anything. Greetings, Your Majesty. Shen Yueji didn't dare to look at the white robe entering the hall. She obediently bowed her head and saluted. Feng Juqing walked in front of her. Seeing her submissive appearance, he reached out to help her. Your Highness, why have you become so obedient today? Shen Yueji chewed the pastry in her mouth that she hadn't swallowed yet. After swallowing it, she slowly said, Your Highness has always been very obedient. The man looked at her with a faint smile and walked to the round chair on the side and sat down. Shen Yueji dared to look up at him. Dressed in an elegant white robe, his black hair was simply tied up, and the hair behind him was like a waterfall. He looked like a playboy. Compared to Feng Juqing, who didn't wear the dragon robe, Shen Yueji found that she still liked him in white. The man was like jade, and the gentleman was unparalleled in the world. It probably described people like him. She quickly stepped forward and poured a cup of tea for the man and handed it to him. Your Majesty, have you had breakfast? Feng Juqing took the tea she handed and shook his head. I came to you after ordering some trivial matters in the court. It just so happens that I haven't had breakfast. Why don't you stay here and have breakfast before you set off? Ask your maid to prepare some food for me to eat on the road. The man's gentle and concise words had already indirectly refused her and said that he would stay for breakfast. Shen Yueji's stomach was full of anger. If she didn't eat and continued to ride in the carriage, she would die. She gave Shuangxi a look. Shuangxi immediately stepped forward and wrapped all the pastries on the tea table with a small handkerchief. She just wanted to say, Your Majesty, I'm ready and can go. However, when she looked up, she saw the man staring at her in a daze. Shen Yueji looked back. Emperor, is there something on this concubine's face? Feng Juqing smiled and pulled her over. At the sight of the man's large hand on the ends of her hair, Shen Yueji was so scared that she hurriedly bent down so that the man could reach her head. It's just leaving the palace. There's no need for imperial consort to bring along the complicated etiquette of the palace. The gold hairpin and jade on her head, no matter which one it was, were extremely heavy. The man took off the jewelry for her one by one, and her black hair was tied up into a simple bun by the man himself. Shen Yueji looked at the familiar hairstyle in the bronze mirror in front of her. His pitch-black eyes narrowed. Because they were patrolling incognito, even the carriage was simple. Sitting in the carriage, the man focused on the book in his hand. As for Shen Yueji, she was sleeping soundly in the carriage. She sat in the same carriage with the man. The carriage was not big, but the decoration inside was extremely elegant. As the carriage bumped from time to time, she would lean closer to the man. Chapter 2:16. She just stared at the man like this, half asleep and half awake, then fell into a deep sleep. The subtle sound of snoring made the man finally willing to look away from the book. He glanced at her clean and sweet sleeping posture. Feng Juqing smiled slightly and reached out to put her little head on his shoulder. When his fingers touched her smooth and tender skin, it was like an electric shock. His eyes became dim, and he suddenly withdrew his hand. At the same time, in Shangha Palace Bang, the entire auspicious Harmony Palace was thrown into chaos. The ground was littered with broken tea utensils and precious jewelry. Gu Yuan's little face was ferocious. Because of anger, Her chest was heaving up and down. That was not all. She flipped over the coffee table in front of her. Her slender little hands were also cut by a sharp weapon, and blood dripped down drop by drop. She was completely unaware of it, and only knew that she would smash and kick whatever she saw in her sight. Her eyes were red and swollen. It seemed that she had been crying for a long time. The hatred in her eyes burst out like an awl. Nanny Gu knelt on the ground, not daring to breathe. Seeing that she had smashed most of the things, she also vented most of her anger. Then she got up from the ground and bandaged the wound on her hand. There were quite a number of sharp weapons stuck in her palm, and she carefully picked out the debris inside. "Your Highness, why did you do this?" The Emperor suddenly left the palace. He must have something important to do. I guess he didn't have time to tell you. Didn't have time? Gu Yuan smiled faintly, and her eyes were full of hatred. Since he didn't have time, why did he take Shin Yueji out of the palace? If it weren't for the informants in the palace, I wouldn't have known that they had left the palace. Nanny Gu. She gritted her teeth and her eyes were scarlet. Wasn't what I did good enough? Ask yourself, what else does he want me to do? I listened to him in everything and did everything for him. In front of father and mother, I said good things about him. My Gu family was loyal. Even the throne was benefited by my Gu family at that time. But my father, mother, and brothers still did their best to assist him. For him, I worked hard to be the queen of the harem. For him, I saw many women being sent to the palace, and I had to live in harmony with them. I helped him take care of the 6 palaces because I was afraid that those women would cause trouble and distract him. She clenched her fists tightly, blood gushing out from her palms once again. If I say that I can't compare to that woman, now, I can't even compare to Shun Yueji. What's so good about that woman? He even brought her out of the palace. He stayed at her place every night, giving all of his favoritism to her. Why? Gu Yuan didn't understand. No one, no woman in this world, would be willing to see the man she loved dote on another woman. In the past, she could be gentle and decent, but that was because she knew, in this harem, no woman could enter his eyes. But the appearance of Shun Yueji made her completely flustered. His every move, his protection and indulgence. It was as if she saw a second Gu Yueqin. The emperor was hers. The emperor could only be hers. Your Highness, please don't be angry. Perhaps it's because of the injury on your face. His Majesty originally planned to take you out of the palace, but in order to let you recuperate in the palace, another hard object came crashing down. Immediately, Nanny Gu's words stopped abruptly. She felt a pain in her head, and a bloody hole instantly appeared. Chapter 217. She didn't dare to move. She knelt on the ground in fear and didn't dare to speak again. I don't want to endure it anymore. I've endured it for so many years. I didn't endure it when I entered the palace. Now that I'm in the palace, I'm still enduring it. Could it be that all of you want me to watch Shin Yueji become my second formidable opponent with my own eyes? How many tricks have I used to get rid of Gu Yueqin? If Shin Yueji becomes important in his heart again, how can I get rid of her? Granny Gu, you have to remember that she's not Gu Yueqin. She's a member of the Shin family. The Shin family has the same status as the Gu family. It's not as easy to get rid of her as it is for Gu Yueqin. Do you understand? Granny Gu moved her lips but didn't dare to say anything. Gu Yuan smiled coldly. Out of the palace? Well, I'll make sure that she won't be able to return. Does the emperor think that she's safe in the Shin family? I'll let him see with his own eyes whether it's dangerous inside the palace or outside the palace. Shin Yueji didn't know how long she had slept. She suddenly felt upset and opened her eyes. She rubbed her eyes and subconsciously thought of Gu Yuan. Gu Yuan must have known that Feng Juqing took her out of the palace. According to her character, after hearing this news, she would definitely go crazy and think of all ways to deal with her. She knew that in her heart, Feng Juqing had already taken root, and she wouldn't allow anyone to covet her. Feng Juqing's subconscious favoritism made her believe that she couldn't even put on the simplest fake act. Thinking of this, Shun Yueji couldn't help chuckling. Compared with the people of the Gu family, Gu Yuan was too well protected. She couldn't hide even the slightest bit of her thoughts, and her well-behaved appearance was full of flaws. How could such a woman live so arrogant until now without the Gu family's support? But the previous her seemed to be even more stupid. She couldn't even see through Gu Yuan's simplest act. "You're awake?" The man's gentle voice rang in her ears. Shin Yueji glanced at him and realized that she and Feng Jiuqing were so close. And when she woke up just now, her head seemed to be on his shoulder. Thinking of this, she hurriedly moved to her side and said, "Your Majesty, after leaving the palace, you can't call me Your Majesty anymore." Ah! Shin Yueji blinked her eyes in confusion. He patted her head with the book in his hand. "Madam." Shin Yueji paused again. "Madam? Is this how the common people call me?" The man looked at her with a hint of a smile on his lips. His dark eyes were like bright stars in the night sky. "Hubby." Feng Jiuqing chuckled softly. The word husband coming out of imperial consort's mouth seems very unfamiliar. Shin Yueji smiled awkwardly. It's also the first time I've called you that, Your Highness." On the night of the wedding, inside the red radish tint, her veil was lifted. The man was dressed in wedding clothes, and his outstanding appearance was set off by the wedding clothes, like a painting. His eyes were smiling and his lips were gentle. He stood on the edge of the bed and looked straight at her. His lips parted as he spoke in a gentle voice with a smile on his face. "Prince is what others call this king. Since Madam is married to this king, you should call this king husband." She shyly agreed and timidly called him husband, only to see the smile in his eyes deepen. His gaze was as gentle as a pool of soft water as he looked deeply at her. Chapter 218. Shun Yueji gave a wry smile, dispelling the memories of the past from her mind. She lifted the curtain and looked outside. In the past, she was too immersed in Feng Jiuqing's gentleness and couldn't extricate herself. She knew that he was good at putting on a gentle and approachable appearance and doing despicable things. But this time, she didn't want to be immersed in it anymore. People who had died once would not die a second time. Especially after leaving the palace, the bustling streets were both familiar and strange at the same time. It reminded her of her own shadow in the past. Feng Jiuqing was a person who knew how to use his strengths. He never trusted anyone, even his closest confidant. He was full of schemes. These days in the palace, she had been with him day and night. While they were playing, his gentle appearance would sometimes make her feel absent-minded. She gazed at the street stalls outside. Speaking of which, many years had passed since the year she married Feng Jiuqing. The familiar street stalls and the old rundown house were places she often visited. The kind old lady gave her a piece of sweet potato because she felt sorry for her. They were all gone. Time continued to flow, and it would not stop for anyone. Shin Yueji put down the curtain, not wanting to see the lively scene outside. "Is there something on your mind, Imperial Consort?" The man's eyes were not on her, but he was asking her. Shin Yueji turned to look at him. "I remember that when I was a child, I often came here with my eldest brother to play. At that time, there were many familiar old women and old men. Now I find that they are all gone, and the former stalls have been occupied by others." The woman's words made the man's hand holding the book tighten. After a long time, he smiled warmly. "Imperial Consort, do you think that things are the same, but people have changed?" "You can't think so. Maybe they are old, and their children don't want them to go out and run around at such an age. They should be at home to enjoy their old age. But it's still thanks to the Emperor." "Oh?" The man laughed and looked at her gently, as if he wanted to know what she would say. Shin Yueji smiled and said, "In the past, before the Emperor was the Emperor, there were many riots in the Feng nation. Civil officials suppressed and bribed people. The people in the capital were robbed and fought over things. The people complained to the heavens. In a small place, there were starving corpses all over the ground. The previous emperor was addicted to beauty and spoiled the treacherous officials, causing the Feng nation to fall into chaos for a short period of time and almost lose the nation. However, after the emperor ascended the throne, everything took a turn for the better. The emperor loved the people like they were his own children. He punished the treacherous officials and recruited skilled craftsmen again. There was no lack of knowledgeable and accomplished people in the Feng country. They were all placed in an important position by the emperor. The people once again returned to their peaceful and happy lives. The envoys from other countries also did not dare to invade again. At this point, Shin Yueji couldn't tell what she was feeling. Feng Jiuqing was an emperor. Even she couldn't deny that he was a good emperor, a very, very good emperor. He loved the people as if they were his own children, and he treated the people as his priority. It was said that he loved power and the country, but in fact, everything he loved was related to the people. Everything he did was for the people. The country was his, and the power was his, but he never squandered it. Whether it was beauties, decorations, food, or necessities, he was still the same as before. However, he wasn't a good husband. He wasn't a man who was worthy of her trust. In his heart, the millions of people in the Feng nation were countless innocent lives. In his heart, she was just a woman who was not essential, including their unborn child. He could plot against his own flesh and blood for the country, for power, and for the people. Shin Yueji's eyes were cold. She didn't want him to see the hatred in her eyes, so she lifted the curtain again and looked outside. Chapter 219. She knew that no matter who would get the Feng kingdom in the end, no one could be like Feng Jiuqing, who loved and cared about the people as if they were his own life. The next moment, her hand was held in the man's palm. His big palm was very warm. It wrapped around her as if it could sweep away all obstacles for her like before. No matter if she was wronged or not, this hand could always give her endless love and love. Imperial concubine, you seem to have a very high opinion of me. The man's words confused Shin Yueji. She turned back to look at him. Shin Yueji understood what he was referring to. Yes, no matter how well Feng Jiuqing did, he only obtained the throne because he rebelled. No matter how much he contributed and sacrificed for the Feng nation, once there was a stain on him, he would never be able to get rid of it in this life. I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Even the officials in the court and the citizens of Feng nation think that you're a good emperor. Hearing this, the man chuckled softly. His lips curled up as if he was mocking himself. Yes, I am a good emperor, but not a good husband. This sentence touched the softest part of Shin Yueji's heart. She calmly took her hand out of the man's palm. You are a man. You should build your career. Love is just a burden. It is a good thing that your majesty can distinguish the importance of it. Was it a good thing? Feng Jiuqing's lips twitched into a smile. The person who sat on the throne was destined to be lonely. His hand tightened subconsciously. The atmosphere in the carriage became silent again. Neither of them said anything to break the silence, until Shuangxi's voice came from outside. Miss, we have arrived at the general's mansion. Shin Yueji was stunned. She subconsciously looked at the man beside her. The man opened his eyes, but did not say anything. She lifted the hem of her dress. Before getting off the carriage, she turned back to look at Feng Jiuqing. Your Majesty, I will visit the general's mansion in person after I deal with my personal affairs. Did he mean that he would not go back with her? Shin Yueji nodded and got off the carriage. The moment the curtain of the carriage was lowered, she could not help but look back. She saw a gentle and handsome face behind the curtain. Your Majesty. Hearing that, Feng Jiuqing looked at her. You have to be careful alone. Hearing this, the man smiled and nodded. Don't worry, Zhen will come back safely to bring Imperial concubine back to the palace. After she got off the carriage, she saw that the carriage didn't stay in front of her for long and just swaggered away. Shuangxi looked at her absent-minded expression. Nyang, are you reluctant to part with the emperor? Shin Yueji chuckled. Why do you say that? When her ladyship looked at his majesty just now, the reluctance in her eyes made it seem like she wanted to leave with his majesty. Double Happiness answered honestly. Shin Yueji just narrowed her eyes and said nothing. Your Highness, look. The great general and madam have both come out. Following Double Happiness's words, he saw a row of people standing at the entrance. Standing in front of them was Shunhe's face, which was filled with tears but did not lose its toughness despite his old age. Shin Xiao was also constantly wiping her tears as she looked at her with tearful eyes. Chapter 220. You old thing. Be gentle, be gentle. Don't strangle our daughter. Shin Xiao stepped forward and pulled Shunhe's hand away. She carefully held Shin Yueji in her arms. Mother's pitiful daughter, You must have lost a lot of weight after entering the palace. Look at your whole body. You're just bones, and you can't even see any meat. Shin Yueji was held by Shan He and Shan Xiao as they entered the residence. When the servants at the entrance of the residence saw her return, they all bowed respectfully. Welcome young miss back to the residence. Without the title of imperial concubine, she returned to the general's mansion as if she was still the arrogant and despotic miss of the general's mansion. The scene in front of her made Shan Yueji's heart sour. Whether it was Shan He or Shan Xiao, everyone in the general's mansion lived in harmony and treated Shan Yueji with sincerity. If they knew that the Shan Yueji standing in front of them was no longer the miss of the general's mansion, what would they think? She gently smiled. Father, mother, everything is fine in the palace. You don't have to worry about me. Hearing her words, Shan He's eyes widened and was about to explode. Shin Xiao couldn't help but pat her. Your daughter has been travel-worn all the way back. Hurry up and let your daughter into the house. What if she gets cold outside? Hearing this, Shan He quickly pulled her hand into the room. Look at father's memory. Your mother is right. Ji just came back. If you have anything to say, let's go into the house first. Let's talk inside. It was said that a daughter and her mother would never stop chatting. After entering the house, Shan He personally went to the kitchen and asked the people to prepare her favorite food. He watched from the side and checked with his own eyes. Shin Xiao, on the other hand, held her hand as tears streamed down her face. Ji, do you know that your father and mother's hearts were almost broken during the few days you were in the palace? Especially your father, when he heard that the daughter of the Gu family had caused trouble in the inner palace to frame you. He almost rushed into the palace and brought you home regardless of the consequences. Shin Yueji held her hand back. Mother, you think of your daughter as too weak. Since I dared to enter the palace, I naturally have a way to deal with the Gu family's daughter. Be that as it may, Shin Xiao couldn't help but shed tears. Mother isn't afraid of the other women in the palace. After all, with our status, those people wouldn't dare to offend you. But Gu Yuan is different. The Gu family's platform is too big. Mother is afraid that you'll be at a disadvantage. Ji, why did you have to go to the palace for no reason? There are so many rules in the palace. You can do whatever you want in the mansion. If you get into big trouble, father and mother will take care of it for you. Shin Yueji clenched her fists. The words that were at the tip of her tongue didn't come out. She was now Shin Yueji, not Gu Yueqin. The real Shin Yueji had already died on the day she was drowned in the lake. Shin Foreign did not know that this daughter was not that daughter, so how would she know that she was eager to enter the palace? Shin Yueji forced a smile and said, Mother, can't you see that the emperor still cares about me? Even when he left the palace to handle some matters, for my safety, he sent me back to the general Fu to be protected by father and mother. From this, it can be seen that in the emperor's heart, I still have some weight. Looking at the inner palace, I'm afraid that even the empress does not have this kind of treatment. Chapter 221. In Shin Xiao's heart, she had never been optimistic about Feng Juqing. There was nothing in the past because Shin Yueji didn't have any contact with him. But now, after Shin Yueji entered the palace, she was full of dissatisfaction when she mentioned his name. If it wasn't because he was the emperor, they couldn't offend their superiors as officials. Big brother hasn't come back yet? Shin Yueji didn't want to be entangled with her on this matter, so she changed the topic. Why mention him? It's not easy for us mother and daughter to see each other. Daughter, tell your mother what kind of grievances you've suffered in the palace. Don't let irrelevant people disturb us. Mother. Shin Yueji was shocked. Big brother is your son. He is not an irrelevant person. Humph. Shin Xiao sneered. In my eyes, I only have you as my precious daughter. I don't care about his useless son. Shin Yueji. Looking at Shan Xiao's face that was filled with expectation, Shin Yueji moved a little. She listened to her questions and her answers with shame. In the back kitchen, sob, General, I missed you so much. Sob. After getting off the carriage, there were many people and Shuangxi didn't dare to be too obvious. After her mother was taken away by the madam, she followed Shan He alone and chased him to the back kitchen. As soon as they met, she immediately rushed over and hugged the man's thigh, crying out of breath. Shunhee's old face was moved. He helped her up from the ground and patted her shoulders solemnly. Shuangshi, I know it's hard for you to follow Ji-er into the palace. You did a good job. Don't worry, I won't treat you badly. Shuangshi sobbed and wiped her tears. General, I've been in the palace for only a short month, but I've already been beaten 3 times. Boo-hoo. Hearing the grievance in her voice, Shanhe glared at her. Who beat you? Shuangshi talked about all the people who beat her, adding oil and vinegar to the story. This Gu Wei and Zhang Sun family. Shanhe gritted his teeth. Don't feel wronged. I will go to the palace tomorrow. I will definitely find trouble with them and help you vent your anger. Double Happiness smiled through his tears. Thank you, General. He suddenly realized that he had to be careful everywhere he went in the palace. He had to observe his surroundings when he spoke to see if anyone was eavesdropping. There were so many rules he had to learn. Shuangshi sighed worriedly. The mansion was still the best. She couldn't help but miss the time when she was with Miss in the manor. There weren't so many rules. The general and madam treated her like their own daughter. In the general's mansion, she could follow Miss and eldest young master to do all kinds of evil things. But once she entered the palace, General, why do you think the young lady suddenly decided to enter the palace? Hearing this, Shunhee's face was full of heartache. Sigh. At the end of the day, Ji-er is doing this for the sake of our Shin family. It's really been hard on her. After saying that, he immediately turned around and ordered the kitchen. Put 2 more drumsticks in Ji-er's bowl later. Look at how thin you've become after entering the palace for more than a month. Hearing this, the kitchen lady nodded respectfully. Don't worry, General. I've already put in 3 drumsticks for Miss. Double Happiness, come here. Shanhe pulled Shuangshi to a big tree not far away and looked at her with a serious expression. Chapter 222. I won't ask much. Tell me everything that happened during the month that your young lady was in the palace. Even the small matter of how she lost a strand of hair and how she lost it. You have to tell me everything and tell me the reason. Double Happiness stood up straight. From entering the palace, Shun Yueji didn't fight for favor. Zhang Sun Wuyue made trouble, Gu Yuan framed her, Mammy Li's death, and Yuxiu's death. There was not the slightest bit of embellishment, but it made Shunhee's heart burst with joy, and he suddenly burst into laughter. Shunhee stroked his beard calmly. Not bad, not bad. You are indeed my daughter. Double Happiness whispered. You can't have her without Madam. Is there anything else? Oh yes. Double Happiness immediately stood at attention. But when she said next, she was particularly cautious. She learned the rules in the palace and didn't forget to look around. Looking at her cautious look, he couldn't help but sigh. Shunhee frowned and straightened her. Don't worry. This is not the palace. You know the people in our mansion. They are loyal. After Miss entered the palace, Prince Regent suddenly fell in love with Mississippi. He would come to Mrs. Phoenix's palace every day. Not only that, Prince Regent didn't leave at night. These words made Shunhee's eyes widen. To be honest, compared to Feng Jiuqing, he was more optimistic about the regent. Compared to Feng Jiuqing's harem, Imo Wushang didn't have a single wife in his residence. Not only that, a few days ago, an official sent 10 beauties to Imo Wushang. He had seen those 10 beauties with his own eyes. Which one of them wasn't a beauty that outshone the moon and the flowers? But Imo Wushang didn't even look at them and directly threw them into his harem. There weren't many men like him in the Feng nation who didn't lust after women. The key was that Imo Wushang's status was high. His status was on the same level as the emperor. When he faced the emperor, he could call himself a loner. If her daughter really had an affair with Imo Wushang, Shunhee's eyes flashed. He turned his back and thought seriously. Should he wait for Shen Yueqi, that little bastard, to come back and have a proper discussion with him? Secretly hiding a group of troops and horses, quietly seeking refuge with the regent? Just by looking at his back, Shuangshi knew what he was thinking. She patted Shunhee's back. General, I think Miss is more attentive to the emperor than Prince Regent. Really? Yes. Shuangshi nodded heavily. Miss used to like the regent so much. Why did she suddenly enter the palace? He must have discovered the emperor's good side. Otherwise, he must have other plans. Since Miss chose to enter the palace, there must be something you want to do. In short, this servant feels that Mrs. Mind is definitely on His Majesty. Shunhe waved his hand. No matter who Ji is interested in, if that brat Mo Wusheng really has feelings for your family's young miss, then let's make preparations first. This general's daughter is so outstanding, it's not a problem to have a few more men in reserve. Oh, that's right. Go tell that fellow from the Shangguan family that your young lady has returned. Ask him to hurry over and see your young lady. Miss. Chapter 223. What do you know? Shunhe couldn't help but stare at her. I want the world to see how excellent my daughter is. Who said that Ji should choose him? Do you want me to show off my daughter? It's better if good men line up. In this way, Ji can choose well. Double Happiness silently stretched out 3 fingers. General, in this case, Miss Ji has a foot on 3 boats. Shunhe glanced at the 3 little claws that she had stretched out. He was about to say that he was the 3rd young master of the Qi family, but he did not say it out loud. Forget it. He would just step on 3 first. If Ji was not satisfied, he would choose a few more. When Double Happiness led a group of servants to the table with food, his strange eyes made Shan Yueji, who was talking to Shun's mother, look back several times. What's wrong with this girl? That, after being stared at by Shan Yueji for a few times, Double Happiness finally couldn't help but close his eyes. Madam, the general said not to let you talk to Miss Ji. Miss Ji will stay at home for a few days this time. If you really miss her, he will make room for you at night and let you 2 sleep. At that time, no one will care about you 2 until dawn. His words made Xinxiu unhappy. She glanced at him coldly. Where is that old thing? Double Happiness said righteously, the general was afraid that you would beat him, so he specially asked me to tell him. After that, he ran away. The sound of Xinxiu grinding his teeth could be heard faintly. Shin Yueji smiled and patted Xinxiu's hand. I am relieved to see that father and mother have such a good relationship. Xinxiu's eyes moved. He didn't answer her words. Instead, he sighed. While the food on the table was still steaming hot, he quickly picked up a piece of chicken leg and put it into her bowl. Ji loves to eat chicken legs from our mansion the most. You probably haven't eaten it since you entered the palace, right? Come, it's rare for you to come back today. I think your father must have asked the kitchen to make more for you. That big plate was filled with chicken drumsticks. Wasn't that a little too much? Shin Yueji smiled. Looking at the greasy chicken legs, she really couldn't arouse any appetite. The table was full of delicious food, but she only symbolically drank a few mouthfuls of porridge. Under Xinxiu's expectant and disappointed eyes, she picked up a few dishes and slowly put them into her mouth. Xinxiu could not help but let go of the tears she had just held back. She took out a handkerchief and silently wiped her tears. In the past, this daughter of hers would eat anything she saw. When had there ever been such a rule? Look at what this harem has done to her innocent, kind, and carefree daughter. Perhaps because Xinxiu's gaze was too eye-catching, Shin Yueji looked back at her in confusion. Mother, what's wrong? You've been talking to your daughter for so long. Don't just let her eat by herself, okay? Xinxiu felt wronged and shed tears. Her heart ached as she picked up a few more dishes for her. Mother is not hungry. It's okay, daughter. You eat, you eat. Looking at the greasy bowl, Shin Yueji really had no appetite. Seeing Xinxiu's gaze on her body, she probably thought of something. She put down the bowl and chopsticks and smiled. After coming back from the palace, I might be a little dizzy, so I have no appetite for meat. Mother, you don't have to worry. Everything is fine in the palace. His Majesty also loves me very much. Mother is fine. Since you can't eat, then don't eat. If you really feel dizzy and uncomfortable, Mother will let the chef prepare a bowl of sour plum soup for you to relieve your discomfort. Chapter 224. Shin Yueji didn't stop her, but bowed her head thoughtfully. If Morong Yun had treated her with half of Xinxiu's kindness, not half, even if it was 1/10 of it, she would not have ended up like this. Her hand was held by Xinxiu. There was still a scar on her white hand. Xinxiu looked at it and cried again. She couldn't help saying, Ji, why don't I talk to your father? We don't want the emperor anymore. Come back? There are so many good men in the world. Why should you fight for the emperor with a woman with 3,000 beauties in the harem? Don't worry, I will find you the best man in the world. He will only have you as his wife in his life. You are not allowed to have him even as a concubine. Mother, what are you talking about? The emperor treats me very well. Besides, although there are 3,000 beauties in the harem, the emperor has never touched them. Even if he doesn't touch them, there are women in the harem after all. I feel uncomfortable. Every woman uses a trick. If the emperor is schemed against, one of the women may be pregnant. Mother, being stared at by her daughter, Shinshio closed her mouth discontentedly. During the conversation, Shun Yueji symbolically ate a few mouthfuls of food, and finally, she couldn't eat anymore. Seeing that it was almost time, Shuangshi whispered a few words in Shinshio's ear. Shinshio's misty eyes immediately lit up. She took Shin Yueji's hand and said, Shuangshi, take your miss to the garden. Shin Yueji didn't understand what Shinshio was trying to do in such a hurry. She forcefully pushed her up from her seat and walked out. She looked back in confusion and asked, Mother, is there something wrong? Why are you so anxious all of a sudden? You'll know when we get to the garden. Shinshio smiled. Being pushed out of the room, Shin Yueji was still confused. Looking at her confused face, Shuangshi smiled and said, Miss, the eldest son of the Shangguan family is here. The eldest son of the Shangguan family? Shun Yueji was even more confused. The name of the Shangguan family was quite famous in the capital, and their business was very big. However, it was only heard of. Did the daughter of the Shen family know the people of the Shangguan family? Seeing her expression, Shuangshi knew that her young miss must be annoyed. I know that miss doesn't like weak men like Shangguan Yu, but young Master Shangguan is so infatuated with miss that he hasn't married yet. After knowing that miss entered the palace, he was depressed for a long time and almost lost his life because of this. The day before her ladyship entered the palace, if it weren't for General and Madam stopping him, young Master Shangguan wouldn't have barged in. Shin Yueji held out her hand to stop her. Double Happiness was confused. Miss? Since I've already entered the palace, I'm the emperor's woman. Why did you let him into the manor? Moreover, looking at Shanshio's happy expression, it was clear that she wanted her to have an affair with Shangguan Yu. At the thought of this, she could not help but twitch the corner of her mouth. The Shin family was really weird. Chapter 225. That's all? Shin Yueji couldn't believe it. Shuangshi immediately patted her chest and promised, Miss, don't you believe my words? You just need to persuade him when the time comes. After all, he is a member of the Shangguan family. The General and Master Shangguan have a good relationship. It won't be good if they become estranged because of this. In the back garden, the man was dressed in white, clean, and elegant. His straight and slender figure was like a jade tree. His long black hair was casually scattered behind his head, and his exposed neck had a poetic beauty. It was fair and tender, like the skin of a baby, so delicate that it could be broken with a blow. He held a folding fan in his hand and a jade pendant on his waist. From this angle, Shun Yueji could only see half of his stunning side face. It was too beautiful to be imagined. His eyes were like black obsidian, his nose was sharp, and his lips were soft and thin. Just looking at him like this, Shun Yueji was slightly absent-minded. This man seemed to be inferior to Imo Wushang and Feng Jiuqing. But Imo Wushang and Feng Jiuqing were rare people in this world. It was a little unfair to compare him with them. Even so, this man's outstanding and handsome features were rare in this world. Shuangshi pushed her forward and quickly waved her handkerchief. She shouted loudly to the man standing there, Young Master Shangguan, my miss is here. The man's quiet body suddenly stiffened, and he suddenly turned around. His delicate and elegant face made people absent-minded. Shangguan Yu stood on the spot and looked at her for a long time. His dark and gloomy eyes gradually lit up, and he quickly walked towards her. He stretched out his hand, and his red lips moved slightly. With a slight tremble, he said, Gee? Finally, as if he thought of something, his bright eyes gradually dimmed. He bowed down respectfully and said, Commoner Shangguan Yu pays respect to imperial concubine. Shin Yueji just stared at him for a while. Even when he knelt down for such a long time, she didn't take the initiative to help him. Miss, you can't bully young Master Shangguan anymore. Shuangxi moved closer to her ear and whispered. As for Shangguanyu, Shuangxi felt sorry for him. He had chased after her miss for so long, but her miss had been cold and indifferent at the beginning. In the end, she was so annoyed that she directly whipped him. Shangguanyu could be said to be the most pitiful man. He had been insulted and beaten countless times by her miss, but he still did not know to give up and followed her. Shuangxi's reminder brought Xin Yueji back to her senses. Oh, she personally bent down and helped him up from the ground. You don't have to kneel. I'm in the mansion now, and there aren't many rules. Xin Yueji didn't know if it was an illusion, but the moment she helped him up, she clearly saw a flash of surprise on Shangguanyu's face. That flattered expression. His face was a little pale, and his handsome face was filled with fatigue. Presumably, it was caused by the decadence of these days. Even if he came today, he had deliberately taken care of himself, but his body did not have the aura of a living person. One could imagine what kind of torture this man had experienced before. No matter how one looked at it, such a man was undoubtedly outstanding. The reason why Xin Yueji looked at him absent-mindedly was that why Xin Yueji didn't like him? Such a gentle and affectionate man who was infatuated with her. If it was anyone else, they wouldn't be able to reject and hate him, right? Chapter 226. Thinking of this, Shun Yueji shook her head again. This was difficult. She was Gu Yueqin now, not herself. Facing such a man, she felt very strange. She really didn't know what to say. Especially when she met his expectant eyes, he had a lot of things to say to her. And she didn't feel anything at all. Well, ahem. She covered her lips and coughed softly. Seeing this, Shangguanyu immediately took off his outer robe and put it on her. Lady Ji, you're wearing thin clothes. Be careful not to catch a cold. The strange smell of a man on his body was fragrant and had the refreshing smell of books. It wasn't unpleasant, but Shun Yueji felt uncomfortable. Child Shangguan, are you here to visit my father? Hearing this, Double Happiness's face immediately darkened. Shangguanyu was taken aback. After a long time, his lips moved and he said mockingly, Lady Ji has never been so distant to me before. He knew that Xin Yueji didn't like him. She used to call him by his full name with disgust. Although her tone was fierce and full of disgust, at least he knew that she didn't like him, but she was willing to vent her anger on him. But now Xin Yueji, she was so distant and emotionless. She called him Child Shangguan like a stranger. Child Shangguan? Seeing that he didn't respond, Xin Yueji called him again. Shangguanyu came to his senses and gave a pale smile. Miss, what can Child Shangguan say to the general? Of course, he knows that you're back, so he came to visit you. And Shuangxi looked at Shangguanyu. This time, young lady and his majesty returned to the mansion incognito. Young Master Shangguan, you don't have to follow so many rules. Just call young lady Jier, just like before. Xin Yueji knew that Double Happiness was talkative, but she didn't expect this girl to be so talkative. Xin Yueji rolled her eyes at her. Forget it. Double Happiness is right. Child Shangguan, you can call me how you used to call me. Hearing this, Shangguanyu's face lit up. He called her gently, Jier. Xin Yueji didn't want to respond. She only felt that this gentleness made her very uncomfortable. She consciously changed the topic. Child Shangguan, do you have something to say to me? Shangguanyu opened his mouth and hesitated. Xin Yueji quietly waited for him for a while before she heard him say, Has Jier been well in the palace for over a month? Hearing this, Xin Yueji suddenly smiled. Of course it's good. The emperor treats me very well. Did young Master Shangguan not see it? Even when I left the palace, he was worried that I would be framed, so he brought me back to the general's mansion first. With every word she said, Shangguanyu's face became paler, and in the end, he was completely bloodless. Xin Yueji didn't care at all. She continued, Life in the palace is much better than in the mansion. Everything is of the highest quality. The concubines in the palace know my identity, and they strive to curry favor with me. No one dares to disrespect me. To me, life in the palace is much better than life in the mansion. Sir Shangguan. Double Happiness cried out in surprise. Shangguan Yu's figure was in a mess. His straight and slender body suddenly fell backward, as if he was going to fall to the ground. Shuangxi reacted quickly and reached out to grab him. Looking at his pale face, his black eyes were filled with regret and pain. Chapter 227. Shin Yueji stared at her. She couldn't even deal with Mo Wushang now. If Shangguan Yu appeared, wouldn't it cause trouble for her? Besides, Shangguan Yu liked her, not her. Since she couldn't give Shangguan Yu what he wanted, it was better to cut off this relationship early, so as not to delay his life. Shuangxi had always been smart. Why couldn't she understand what she was thinking? Ji likes to eat Lu Ji's osmanthus cake. I haven't been back to the capital for more than a month. The capital has changed a lot. How about I take you to the capital? After calming himself down, Shangguan Yu forced a smile and looked at Shin Yueji. He was afraid that she would say no. Shin Yueji really wanted to say no. Lu Ji's couple has been waiting for Ji. Shangguan Yu spoke first. Miss, have you forgotten? Lu Ji's osmanthus cake business in the capital was almost closed. It was you and young Master Shangguan who sponsored them and protected them from being bullied by the people in the capital. Shin Yueji still had some impression of this through her own memory. Secondly, she had always wanted to see the scenery of the capital. When she left the palace with Feng Jiuqing, she wanted to have a good look. But if the other party was Shangguan Yu, she was a little hesitant. No one knows the scenery of the capital better than me. My Shangguan family has been doing business in the capital and has been to all kinds of places. Although Ji has traveled all over the capital, there are many new interesting places in the past month. I can introduce them to Ji one by one. If Ji doesn't want to see my face, Shangguan Yu's bright eyes gradually dimmed. At that time, I can also wear a mask and lead the way for Ji. If Shin Yueji continued to refuse him, it would seem that she had gone too far. She looked at him and smiled. Young Master Shangguan, what are you talking about? In that case, please lead the way. But, she hesitated. I just came back from the palace. I've been traveling all the way and I want to take a bath first. Shangguan Yu's handsome face blushed. He looked away unnaturally and said softly, Okay, then I'll wait for Ji here. Do you think I don't have enough trouble? Another trouble for me? After leaving the back garden, Shin Yueji couldn't help but pull Shuangxi's ear and scold him. Shuangxi covered her ear that was being pulled and said pitifully, Miss, you can't blame this servant. I don't blame you? Shin Yueji sneered. Shuangxi nodded. That's right. Everyone in the capital knows that the eldest young master of the Shangguan family is infatuated with you. He has been following behind you since he was very young. You can't even chase him away. No matter how you hit, scold, or humiliate him, young Master Shangguan will always look at you with a smile on his face. He has never complained. Which man in this world doesn't have some self-esteem? Miss has treated young Master Shangguan so excessively, but he still loves you. Chapter 228. Double Happiness's words stirred a lot of emotions in Shin Yueji's heart. She opened her mouth and wanted to ask, since he is so infatuated, then why didn't Shin Yueji have any feelings for him? How many people in this world could compare with Shangguan Yu's elegant and peerless face? It's all because of you, Mississippi. You've always treated the Prince Regent as your god. You hate those weak and bookish scholars the most. You think you can beat them to death with a whip. Why would you care about eldest young Master Shangguan? Shuangxi grumbled and tugged at her sleeve. Your ladyship, Master Shangguan is actually quite pitiful. You should look at him a few more times. Even if you can't be with him, it's still better than bullying and beating him every day. Madam and the general love you so much that sometimes they can't bear to see hit young Master Shangguan. Shin Yueji's mouth twitched. This was probably why Shinshio was so happy after hearing the news of his arrival. A man who liked and tolerated their daughter so much was rare in this world. In their hearts, Shangguan Yu was the most suitable son-in-law. But it was a pity. While taking a bath, Shin Yueji asked Double Happiness to tell Shanshio that she wanted to go to the capital, but she didn't say who she was going with. According to Double Happiness's words, she was afraid that he would tell Shanshio which man she was going with. When Shin Yueji came out of the room after taking a bath, She saw Double Happiness standing outside the door with a big bag in her arms, looking at her eagerly. Looking at the big bag in Double Happiness's arms, Shin Yueji frowned. What are you holding in your arms? Silver. Double Happiness looked at her. Madam knows that Miss is going to the capital, so she specially asked me to carry silver with me, so that you don't lack silver when you buy things. Looking at the thick bag, just this amount of silver was enough to feed a village of extravagant food and clothing expenses, right? She stared at Double Happiness for a long time. I don't lack anything. I'm just strolling around. If there's anything I like to eat, it won't cost much. Aren't you tired from bringing so much money with you? No, I'm not tired. No one will dislike having too much silver. Don't worry, miss. This servant won't feel tired even if I carry it for a whole day. Shin Yueji was speechless and could only let her be. In the back garden, the man was still standing there. During the time she had been gone, he had not moved a single step. Seeing her return, Shangguan Yu's fair face lit up with joy, and he stepped forward to welcome her. You're back? Because she had just taken a bath, there was a very nice fragrance on her body. Her hair was still a little wet, and she was clean without any makeup. She was breathtakingly beautiful, especially her pair of crystal grape-like eyes, which made people feel dejected. Shangguan Yu stared at her for a long time. In the end, it was Shun Yueji who spoke first. Let's go. After all, she was already the emperor's woman, so the two of them shouldn't be sharing the same carriage to avoid suspicion. However, she didn't know what Shin Xiao and the others were thinking. It seemed like they wanted to match them up, so they squeezed them into the same carriage. Chapter 229. During this period, after sitting in the carriage, Shin Yueji leaned far away on the right side and picked up a book to read. The carriage was not very spacious. Their breaths were intertwined. In the quiet carriage, they could clearly hear their light breathing. Just as Shun Yueji read the book carefully, the man looked at her carefully. After many times, Shun Yueji finally couldn't bear it anymore. She put down the book lightly and looked at the man beside her. Child Shangguan, is there something on my face? Understanding what she meant, Shangguan Yu awkwardly looked away, lifted the curtain, and looked out of the carriage. Have you always looked down on me? What? No. Shangguan Yu laughed self-deprecatingly and looked back at her. Comes from a family of generals, so the one you despise the most is? I never said that I hate you. Have you ever heard of a saying, Child Shangguan? Without looking at the happy expression on the man's face, Shin Yueji said lightly, in this world, not all feelings are paid back. Liking a person is not to pester her and make her dissatisfied with you, but you don't know how to retreat. I don't hate scholars, but those who know that this person is not a good match for you, but still make a meaningless struggle and resistance. Shin Yueji's indifferent words made the man's thin body stiffen. Child Shangguan, you have a good family background, good appearance, and good knowledge. You are superior in all aspects. With such an identity, what kind of woman can't you get? Moreover, I've also heard that many of the daughters of aristocratic families are infatuated with young Master Shangguan, and they're willing to use their entire lives to wait for you. Is persuading me to let go? Shangguan Yu's dark eyes flashed with endless pain. In the past, she beat him, scolded him, and humiliated him. But he still went his own way. He was willing to be beaten and scolded by her, and he wanted to follow her and pester her, so that he could see her and she could see him, even if her eyes were filled with disgust, hatred, dissatisfaction, and even anger. But Shangguan Yu was happy in his heart. Seeing her again today, she was very different from before. Although it had only been a short month, he felt that she had changed a lot. She was no longer arrogant and despotic like before. The way she did things and spoke had changed a lot. Perhaps this was what she was like after entering the palace. He felt sorry for her and loved her. He thought that she must have suffered a lot of bullying and grievances after entering the palace. That was why she became like this. Shangguan Yu was happy that she could calm down and talk to him, but not after all the difficulty she had gone through. Her simple and domineering claws had all been smoothed out. He called her softly. Do you know that I've been working hard to live the way you like? I've been working hard. As long as I think of you, I feel that all the hardships and tiredness I've experienced are worth it. But why? His heart felt like it was being torn apart, and it was so painful that he almost couldn't breathe. He looked at Shun Yueji's beautiful face, which was familiar and strange at the same time. He didn't know how many times this face had appeared in his dreams. He fantasized that one day, she would fall in love with him and be his bride. He had been waiting for himself to become stronger, to make himself work harder, but she suddenly entered the palace. He was caught off guard, and he couldn't accept it. Chapter 230. He became seriously ill. After knowing that she had entered the palace to become the emperor's woman, his illness never recovered. He couldn't eat anything and coughed up blood every day. Even the doctor said that he wouldn't live for long. He wanted to see her for the last time before he died, but he felt that he couldn't live through that day. Who knew that she would suddenly return to the Fu? After hearing this news, it was as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. He cleaned up the mess that he had been in for over a month. He soaked in the water for a long time. He was afraid that the stench from his body would make her sick. He cheered himself up to see her, to see the person who made him yearn for day and night. He thought that she would still be the same as before. She didn't like him, didn't want to see him, insulted him, and hit him. But she changed. Not only did she not hit him, but she didn't scold him. Even the way she looked at him was different from before. She used to hate him, but now she didn't hide it. His heart was throbbing. He wanted to reach out and grab her little hand that was hanging over her skirt, but the moment he was about to touch her hand, she quietly put her hand on the coffee table, picked up a piece of pastry and put it in her mouth, then calmly picked up the book on the side of the table to read. His chest was filled with sorrow. He suddenly smiled in a depressed tone, but he forced a smile. Now, do you even want to take back the right that I like you? Child Shangguan is the only legitimate son of the Shangguan family. Your Shangguan family's property will fall on you in the future. If you don't get married, not to mention that the Shangguan family's descendants will be cut off in your generation, even your Shangguan family will fall on when the two elders are old in the future. After so many years, you still don't understand me? Stop the carriage in front. The street in front is busy. Let's walk there. As soon as the man spoke, Shen Yueji ordered the groom outside. Shang Guanyu swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue bitterly. Seeing Shen Yueji get off the carriage, he hurriedly reached out to help her. After all, he was a step late. He glanced at the empty hand, smiled bitterly, and got off the carriage. The streets of the capital seemed to be a lot livelier than she remembered. Shen Yueji walked in front and looked at the hawkers and stalls on both sides of the street. There were people coming and going, and lively and cute children running around because of some food, giggling and bargaining sounds. There were also many peddlers who were quarreling over trivial matters. Yo, little beauty, are you going to sell yourself after your father dies? At this time, she heard a man's sharp voice. Shin Yueji turned her head to look and saw a fat middle-aged man standing beside a young girl in tattered clothes kneeling on the ground. He saw the young girl kneeling on the ground with a corpse wrapped in a straw mat beside her. On the cloth in front of her, the words, "Selling my body to bury my father," were written in large characters. Such incidents were not uncommon in the capital. Under the management of Feng Juqing, there were fewer and fewer people like this in the Feng nation. After watching for a while, she lost her interest. If it was in the past, she might be kind to this young girl and give her some money so that she could leave after burying her father and find a place to start a small business. But now, she just watched coldly from the side, especially when the fat man stretched his hand to her chest and touched her body unscrupulously in front of everyone. Chapter 231. Shuangshi hated this kind of man. She wanted to teach him a lesson, but seeing that her miss didn't say anything, she glared at him fiercely and didn't step forward. Well, her chest is too small. It's not even enough to fill the gap between my teeth. It's just a little girl. It's a loss to buy her. The fat man groped all over her body, his face full of disgust. Finally, his gaze froze, and his lecherous gaze fell on her lower body. His disgusting large hands slid down to her legs, spreading them wide open. The girl swallowed her anger and didn't dare to move. The middle of the road began to be surrounded by passers-by. Perhaps because they were afraid of the fat man's identity, they coldly watched from the side. No one stood up to stop him, and some laughed at the girl's wanton behavior. Feeling the people around pointing at her, they all looked down on this girl. Low, dirty, disgusting, abusive. All kinds of voices intertwined together, all pointing at the girl. Shangguan Yu's white face alternated between green and white, extremely ugly. He was about to step forward. I don't want to meddle in these things, and I don't want the people around me to meddle. A cold voice rang in his ears. He paused and turned around to look at Shen Yueji. Shen Yueji looked back at him. To be precise, I don't want to disturb my mood of shopping because of this. If young Master Shangguan wants to meddle, then do it. We'll say goodbye here. Jeer. Shangguan Yu was shocked. Seeing that she had indifferently turned and left, he no longer looked at the girl who was being bullied and quickly caught up with her. If Jeer doesn't like to be disturbed, then I don't care. He walked in front of her and stopped her. His voice was sincere, and his expression was serious. Shen Yueji passed him and walked a few steps forward. The man followed closely, as if he knew that he had just done something wrong. He just silently followed her and didn't speak again. Do you know why I didn't save her? Shangguan Yu shook his head. Shen Yueji smiled. You can't even take care of your own mess, so why bother to meddle in other people's business? This kind of thing happens every day in this world. You are not a savior, so why should you be merciful and save them? Also, can you guarantee that the person you save will be loyal to you and not an ingrate? Shangguan Yu was puzzled by her words. He felt that he didn't know Shen Yueji at all. Jeer, what's wrong? She's still a young girl. She's being disrespected and humiliated by a man in front of everyone. With so many people pointing at her and gossiping about her, do you think it's possible for Master Shangguan to do the same? Shangguan Yu was stunned when he heard this, and he seemed to have recalled the scene of the young girl being too calm. Shen Yueji smiled faintly. They said that he was killed by selling his father, but the man wrapped in the mat was covered in wounds of different sizes. It didn't look like he was beaten up. The wounds on his body weren't deep, but they weren't heavy either. The densely packed strangulation marks were something that only a little girl would have. There are whip marks on his exposed legs. If it was a man, the force would have been heavy and deep. However, the strength of the whip is clearly just a superficial wound. It is obvious that it was caused by a woman. Chapter 232. Hearing that she mentioned the past again, Shangguan Yu smiled and said, Yes, Jeer hit me, but it didn't hurt at all. It was false that it didn't hurt. Only love was real. With love, whatever Shen Yueji did, he would feel that she loved him and looked lovely. If there was no love, it would be hatred that could be remembered for a lifetime. Miss, do you mean that there's something wrong with the little girl? Double Happiness, who was behind her, also realized that something was wrong from Shen Yueji's words and asked, The little girl is indeed a little girl. There's nothing wrong with her, but her temperament is different. Temperament? Shen Yueji walked in front and lightly said, The man wrapped in the mat tube died not long ago. Not only are there whip wounds on his exposed legs, but they are also white and bony. It's obvious that this person was seriously ill when he was alive and didn't have enough to eat. It's normal for homeless people like them to not have food to eat, and it's normal for them to die of illness. However, the scars on his body prove that he was beaten to death while he was still breathing. During his illness, he also suffered inhumane torture. Miss, do you mean that the person who beat him and killed him is that little girl? This was too unbelievable. Didn't the little girl sell herself to bury her father? To be able to list out such a piece of cloth, it was enough to show how filial she was to her father. If it was really as her young miss had said, that her father had been tortured by her when he was alive and beaten to death by her before he died, then this little girl was too scheming, wasn't she? She had no one to rely on in the capital city. Although it was easy for a woman to get married and be chosen as a concubine with some beauty, she didn't have a good reputation. If she was a master of a big family, she would only end up with a reputation of being robbed. But this little girl sold herself to bury her father and became a concubine of a rich family with filial piety. In the future, no matter whether she was favored or not, After being bullied by superior wives and concubines, she could pretend to be pitiful to win the master's sympathy. Speaking of this, Shen Yueji seemed to think of something and laughed self-mockingly. Don't you men all like beautiful, gentle, and dependent women? Hearing the sarcasm in her tone, Shang Guanyu didn't understand, but he still refuted. He's just someone else. You know if he liked this kind of woman, he would have married someone else long ago. How could he have been bullied by her for so many years, and his heart still hadn't wavered? What he liked was Shen Yueji's arrogance and despotic attitude, and how she would bare her fangs and brandish her claws when she bullied him. This is also the reason why I am not willing to help her. If I give her a sum of money and she sees that I am well-dressed, she will definitely not give up. In the name of serving me for the rest of her life, I don't know what she is scheming behind my back. Maybe when I bring her into the palace and she sees the emperor, she will have the thought of transforming into a phoenix. Who knows, if I leave her in the general's mansion, she might be able to climb into my father's bed without my father knowing. Shin Yueji smiled. There are pitifully few people in this world who are clear-minded. If that person is willing to throw away his life and serve her loyally just to save her, then wouldn't there be a river of such people by my side? Her hand was held by the man. Chapter 233. But Shang Guanyu held her so tightly that she couldn't break free at all. Shin Yueji stared at him coldly. Young Master Shangguan, this is the capital. There are so many people coming and going here and there. There are bound to be people who know us. If this matter is seen by someone who knows us, they will spread rumors. My matter is a small matter, but if your Shangguan family is implicated because of this, you know I'm not afraid of these things. What kind of grievances have you suffered these past few days? What happened? Why did you become like this? I know I can't help you. You don't like me, but I hope you can take me as a friend to talk to. Tell me your difficulties and what's on your mind. Don't keep it in your heart. Trust me, okay? Even if everyone else can betray you, only I won't. Shun Yueji had never been like this in the past. Shangguan, you could vaguely guess that she must have been bullied by someone just from the distant and strange way of addressing her. She was proud and would never be willing to swallow her anger. But now she had to do this. His heart throbbed with pain. He knew that the emperor's harem was a dangerous place. Even if she had a powerful backer, her pride had long been ground away by the cruel place in the harem. At the thought of the women he loved and the grievances they had suffered in the harem, Shangguan, you couldn't help but feel upset. He hated himself for not becoming stronger. If he were stronger, would he be qualified to stand by Ji-er's side and protect her? The man's eyes were so sincere that Shun Yueji wanted to avoid them many times, but his eyes seemed to be glued to her. She sighed in her heart and looked not far away. She saw a piece of cloth next to a simple house not far away, on which the words Lu Ji Osmanthus Cake were written. Double happiness, she called out. Double happiness answered and walked in front of her. Miss, what's wrong? Buy some osmanthus cake. Whether it was herself or her former self, they both seemed to have a special love for osmanthus cake. Double happiness hurriedly agreed, and with a bag full of silver, he jogged away. Shangguan Yu was about to stop her, intending to buy it for her himself, but after Double happiness left, there were only the two of them left. Out of selfishness, he smiled slightly to cover up his gaffe and did not say anything. Looking at Double happiness who was queuing up, Shin Yueji couldn't help but say, look at this small place. It's not as clean as other shops, but there are so many people. Maybe it's because this couple is honest. The man chuckled and continued her words. Shin Yueji looked back at him. It was true that the food he gave was never short of weight. Compared with other osmanthus pastry shops, their food was much more affordable and delicious. Seeing this, Shin Yueji seemed to recall the osmanthus cake shop that she once ate at. They were also an old couple. Ever since she married Feng Juqing, she had never seen them again. Perhaps it was just as he had said. Their family saw that they were getting old and couldn't bear for them to go out and run about, so they let them live out the rest of their days at home. Come here. Suddenly, her hand was caught by the man. The warmth from the man's palm shocked Shin Yueji. Before she could speak, she was pulled into a narrow alley by the man. What's wrong? Someone is following us. Chapter 234. Remember to stay here and don't run around. I'll be back soon. This narrow alley was not big and seemed to be safe. Shang Wanyu said a few words to her and then turned to leave. This man was really good at hiding things. Shin Yueji looked at his back as he left. It was not difficult to ignore the strong, murderous aura that filled the air at that moment. He knew martial arts, and at a very high level. According to her own memory, Shang Wanyu did not seem to know martial arts at all. Shin Yueji took a step back and leaned against the wall. She did not know if there was anyone following them, but she could not be more familiar with a person. From the moment he came, she had sensed it. She narrowed her eyes, crossed her arms, and glanced at the deserted alley. Come out. Imo Wushang, dressed in a black robe, descended from the sky like a god. His handsome face was stained with layers of coldness at this moment. His pair of cold eyes, as if frozen, fell on Shun Yueji's indifferent face without blinking. He glanced at her and very naturally walked in front of Shun Yueji. He stretched out his hand and pulled her into his arms. He said in a muffled voice, "You are not allowed to hang out with other men." To be honest, I really did not intend to hang out with this man. You have been here for so long. Do you know who the people following us are? Shun Yueji let him hug her as she poked his hard chest with her finger. She was not surprised to see him Wushang. His mansion was in the capital. After she returned to the mansion, he naturally returned to his Prince Regent's mansion. If he wanted to see her, it would be easier than entering the palace. Although Shin Yueji only discovered this after returning to the mansion. It's people from the Gu family. Gu family? Shin Yueji quickly understood the meaning of these 5 simple words. She narrowed her eyes. Gu family? They know that I left the mansion so quickly? From the palace to the capital, it only took a few hours. If it was the Gu family, according to Gu Wei's means, he would not directly order people to secretly follow her to hurt her. Was it Gu Yuan? Other than Gu Yuan, Shin Yueji couldn't think of anyone else in the Gu family who could be so fast to send someone to follow her so quickly. Shin Yueji had guessed that Gu Yuan wouldn't obediently swallow her anger after Feng Juqing took her out of the palace this time. This was out of Shun Yueji's expectations. Why was she so impatient? As if she had thought of something, Shin Yueji suddenly smiled. Meeting the man's eyes, she opened her mouth. It's rare for me to leave the palace this time. I really can't stay in the general's mansion as the emperor wishes, don't you think so, Regent? The man's eyes flickered. He pinched her chin and rubbed his fingers against her smooth chin. Actually, you can also live in my residence. This man, can't you think of something good in your head? Slapping his hand away, Shin Yueji couldn't help but kick him. The man didn't dodge and let her kick him. Shin Yueji kicked him, but her anger was still not appeased. She pulled his hand over and bit down hard on it, until she saw rows of teeth marks on the back of his hand. She licked her lips and stared at him for a long time. Does it hurt? Imo Wushang shook his head. His round fingers touched her lips again, and his black eyes brightened. Live with me? No, what would it be like to live with you? I am the emperor's concubine. Besides, father and mother will not agree. Chapter 235. Shin Yueji had a headache and held her forehead. She had no doubt that her 2 weird parents must be in a hurry to let her live with Imo Wushang. The problem was, it was hard for them to let her, a woman, deal with so many men. How much effort did they have? How is my second brother's matter going? If nothing goes wrong, he will return to the capital tonight. Tonight? Shin Yueji smiled and nodded. So, I will see Li Yingying soon? Li Yingying? The man raised his eyebrows. Shun Yueji deliberately kept him guessing, as if thinking of something funny. When do you plan to return to the mansion? I will be with you. I will stay in the mansion for a few days. You can come to see me at any time. I just said, when do you plan to return today? Looking at the man's dissatisfied expression, Shin Yueji's mouth twitched. Are you going to stick to me for a few days? Miss. Shuangshi's worried voice suddenly came from outside. Here. Shin Yueji waved at her. Seeing her, Shuangshi quickly ran towards her with the osmanthus cake and a bag of silver. Regent? As she approached, She found that Shangguanyu, who was standing next to her miss, had become Imo Wushang. Her little face, which was full of joy, immediately changed color. Well, Regent, I pay my respects to Regent. Imo Wushang didn't look at her, but took the osmanthus cake in her hand, took a piece and put it to Shun Yueji's mouth. Shun Yueji's little heart was beating fast. She opened her mouth and took a bite. It was sweet but not greasy. When she was about to take a second bite, he had already opened his mouth and threw the half she had bitten into his mouth. She covered her mouth and coughed awkwardly. Don't worry, someone is following us. Young Master Shangguan is going to deal with them. Ah, Shuangxi blinked. But miss, young Master Shangguan doesn't know martial arts? I didn't feel the existence of those people who are secretly following us. They must be very good at martial arts. Will young Master Shangguan be in trouble if he goes to find them? He doesn't know martial arts? Shin Yueji looked at him. Do you know him very well? In my opinion, his martial arts are not weak. Just as Double Happiness said, she did not know that someone was following her. Even she did not feel it. One could imagine how high Shangguanyu's martial arts were. Shuangxi still wanted to say something, but the man shot her a cold look. Are you very free? These cold, simple, and concise words made Double Happiness shiver. He quickly shook his head. No, I'm not idle. I'm very, very busy. Miss, do you and the Prince Regent want to go to the tea house in the opposite room? When did I say that? The Phoenix Tea House opposite is where Miss used to like to sit. The place is spacious, soft, and comfortable, and there are a lot of dishes. Shuangxi hugged the heavy silver. Miss is not in a hurry. Anyway, the capital is so big, you won't be able to finish shopping in a short amount of time. Also, Miss has stayed in the Fu for 3 to 4 days. Since you just returned to the capital, you should rest first and recover your energy before going shopping. Isn't that right, son-in-law? With that, she didn't forget to glance at Imo Wushang and even changed the way she addressed him. Shin Yueji. Chapter 236. Shuangxi was overjoyed. Her hands that were holding the silver were trembling. After a long time, she squeezed out a sentence excitedly. Thank you, young master. No, Shun Yueji was upset. She wanted to say something, but the man had already carried her off the ground. She glanced at Shuangxi, who was so happy that she was about to ascend to heaven. With a gloomy face, he said, I say, that silver was given to me by my parents. When did it become yours? What's yours is mine. What about yours? What's mine is yours. As the regent of the Feng nation, Imo Wushang did not only have great power, but also wealth that could rival a nation. The problem was, Shin Yueji was still conflicted about the big bag of silver in Shuangxi's arms. Do you know that the silver in her arms is enough to feed a small village for a lifetime? Moreover, it's the kind that eats meat every day and wears silk. Perhaps it was because of her seriousness that the man's dark eyes fell on her, and he listened to her seriously. Grabbing his collar with both hands, Shin Yueji said seriously, Shuangxi serves me. Not only does my parents give her benefits, but even I give her silver on time every month. Sometimes, I give her the jewelry that I don't want. Look at my jewelry, which one of them isn't expensive. I'm not stingy and give them all to her. She has already taken a lot of benefits from me. You are my man. You can't be partial to her. Give her all the silver that my parents gave me. This way, she won't be loyal to me. She mumbled. Realizing that something was wrong, the man's handsome face suddenly moved closer to her. Her lips felt warm. The man sucked on her delicate lips and nibbled a few times. Then, Shun Yueji felt herself falling rapidly in his arms. On the other side, Shuangxi was holding a bag full of silver and seeing stars. She took a silver ingot and put it in her mouth and bit it hard. She was extremely excited. The next second, a cold wind blew and her vision went black. After a while, her vision cleared up, but before she could see clearly who it was, the big bag of silver in her arms was gone just like that. She looked down in horror. Where was the silver? Where was the silver? She opened her mouth wide in surprise. The smile and pride on her face were still frozen on her face, and she didn't have time to change her expression. Silver. Returning to midair, Shin Yueji happily reached out towards Imo Wushang, wanting to take back the bag of silver. In the end, he casually tossed the bag of silver onto the ground. The passers-by on the street saw it and immediately snatched it up in a frenzy. Soon, it was all gone, leaving behind a lonely piece of cloth. Without the weight of the silver, it fluttered in the wind. Her trembling hands climbed onto the man's chest. Imo Wushang was puzzled by her sudden malevolent expression. Shin Yueji angrily gnawed and bit his exposed neck. The man's pitch-black eyes flickered with lust. He tightened his grip on her waist and said in a hoarse voice, Don't rush. Don't worry your grandpa. She only said that it was a pity to give so much money to Shuangxi and asked him to take it back and return it to her. In the end, he just threw it all to the people below. He might as well give it all to Shuangxi. Shin Yueji's breath was stuck in her throat, and she couldn't breathe for a long time. Put me down. What's wrong? Put me down. Imo Wushang didn't know how he had offended her and was a little flustered. Are you going to put me down or not? Imo Wushang, I'm telling you. Chapter 237. The man's big hand froze and landed on a roof with her in his arms. His deep eyes were locked on her little face that was filled with anger. He pursed his red lips and did not say a word. Shin Yueji was just about to go down when she glanced at the people on the street. With such a high roof, one could have a panoramic view of the capital city. Her little face darkened. Obviously, Imo Wushang had put her at the highest place. Big brother is going back to the mansion today. I have to go back and wait for him. She glanced at the man and motioned for him to carry her down. Imo Wushang turned his back indifferently. What do you want? Shin Yueji leapt in front of him in 2 steps and looked straight at his frosty face. Forget it if you don't want to say anything. It's not like I can't go down myself. Shin Yueji didn't care. She closed her eyes and jumped down. It was all his fault if she fell and became handicapped. It was as if she knew that the man would hold her, so Shin Yueji jumped without hesitation. She just felt her body falling down, and the next second, her waist was held by the man. She opened her eyes and met the man's dark eyes. They were as bright as stars. Imo Wushang held her firmly in his arms. His cold voice was hoarse as he buried his head in her neck. I want everything of you, but you are not obedient. I am obedient. You always force me. The man's Adam's apple moved and his handsome face rubbed against her neck. I didn't force you. Yes. No. Yes. If Jier says yes, then yes. Shin Yueji was satisfied that she had the upper hand in words. She leaned in the man's arms and was as obedient as a kitten. Do you know how much money my parents gave me? I asked you to snatch it back for me, but you just threw the money to those people. If I knew you were like this, I wouldn't have asked you to snatch it from Shuangxi's arms. She could just go back and give it to Shuangxi. Jier, yes. Money is just a worldly possession. What? You. If you have me, then you have everything. The man carefully rubbed her neck with his crimson lips, enjoying the tenderness and sweetness inside. Everything I have is yours. Shin Yueji blushed and pushed his head away. My mother often said that a man's mouth is a liar. I did not lie to you. Whether or not you're lying to me is not something that you can just say with your mouth. I'm already tired of hearing such promises. Anyone would be able to say that. Shin Yueji pushed him away and sat alone on the roof. Her heart was in a mess after Imo Wushang's antics, and she no longer had the mood to continue playing. Just like that, the two of them sat silently for a while. Shin Yueji saw Shangguan Yu's slender figure flash into the alley. Shuangxi was hugging the silver and crying to herself. Seeing a white brocade robe in front of her, she raised her head with tears in her eyes. When she saw Shangguan Yu's handsome, warm, and somewhat evil face, she didn't know if it was an illusion, but the evil aura that flashed by made her feel like she was seeing things. Young Master Shangguan, she sobbed. Not seeing Shin Yueji, Shangguan Yu frowned. Shuangxi, where's your miss? Miss, she. Shuangxi continued sobbing. Young Master Shangguan, don't worry. Miss is fine, but I have something. Chapter 238. Silver. Silver. I don't know which bastard stole all the silver that the regent gave me. Double Happiness hugged her empty arms, as if the warmth of the silver was still there. Why was her life so bitter? She had finally gotten so much silver, enough for her to live a carefree and happy life for so long. Suddenly, it was gone. Everything was gone. Sob, sob, sob. It was so sad. The regent? Imo Wushang? Shangguan Yu's gentle face suddenly changed. He had seen Ji Er's feelings for Imo Wushang all these years. Seeing his beloved woman throwing herself at that man, he couldn't tell what he was feeling in his heart. After she entered the palace, he thought she had already given up on Imo Wushang. He didn't expect that she would be with him again. Shangguan Yu couldn't help but clench his fists under his robe. There was a layer of coldness on his handsome face, but when Shuangxi looked at him, he quickly hid the coldness and smiled at Shuangxi. Where did the regent take Ji Er? Young Master Shangguan, don't go. I don't know what's wrong with the regent recently. He's been very nice to my Mississippi. He must have taken her to some interesting place. I'm afraid that young Master Shangguan will go after her. Miss is fine, but I'm afraid that the regent... After all, Imo Wushang was famous for being cold and bloodthirsty in the whole Feng country. She was afraid that if Shangguan Yu went after her, it would be dangerous. Shangguan Yu obviously didn't think so. Double Happiness, I brought your miss out of the mansion. I should bring her back. But Double Happiness was hesitant. Looking at Shangguan Yu's expectant eyes, she stamped her feet and said, Young Master Shangguan, I'll tell you the truth. Although I like your love for Miss for so many years, I think you're the best man in the world and worthy of Miss's lifelong commitment. But this servant is just a servant girl after all, and cannot control Miss's thoughts. What this servant can do is, whoever Miss likes, this servant will do my best to help Mississippi. Young Master Shangguan, you've seen it. Whether it's in the past or now, Miss has never treated you as a man and a woman, including now. When we were in the mansion today, I've already asked Miss about it. Miss's reply was firm and decisive. She felt that young Master Shangguan deserved better. Shangguan Yu didn't doubt her words at all. Shuangxi was her maid, so he knew that Shen Yueji must have told her this personally. For a moment, he almost couldn't breathe. His face was as white as a sheet of paper. At this moment, it was as if a gust of wind could blow, and he would fall to the ground powerlessly. Even so, he did not give up and continued to ask. These were all personally told by your young Mississippi. Double Happiness didn't dare to look at his injured face. Emotionally, even Double Happiness felt that her young miss had gone too far. Young Master Shangguan was such a good person, but her young miss hurt him from time to time. In the past, she beat him, scolded him, and humiliated him. Although she didn't beat him or scold him anymore, if she was decisive, she might as well have beaten him and humiliated him in the past. However, the other party was her young Mississippi. Double Happiness couldn't do anything. Although she sympathized with Shangguan Yu, her heart was biased towards her young Mississippi. She was biased towards her young miss like a mountain. Chapter 239. The Prince Regent can compete with the Emperor, but young Master Shangguan, you are the Emperor's subjects and people. If you do this, you will implicate the whole Shangguan family. Double Happiness said a lot to him, but Shangguan Yu didn't listen to a word. He staggered and turned to leave. His back was unprecedentedly lonely. Double Happiness wanted to stop him, but the words were on the tip of her tongue. She wasn't her mistress, so what was the use of calling him? Moreover, she was the one who should be sad at this moment. She hugged herself and squatted on the ground again, crying. Her silver, sob sob sob, which damned bastard dared to steal her silver, sob sob sob. Shangguan Yu walked for a long time. For such a long time, from day to night, he didn't know where he was. He went back and forth, stopped and walked. Unknowingly, he had gone back and forth in the huge capital, going in circles for so long. He raised his head and looked at the Drunken Joy house in front of him, which was surrounded by lights and ambiguous atmosphere. He stopped here and stared at the plaque of the Drunken Joy house for a long time. The Drunken Joy house was the largest brothel in the capital. It was full of business day and night, and never stopped. Whether it was day or night, there seemed to be endless people coming and going. From inside came the sounds of laughter, the delicate voice of a woman, and the laughter of a man who was laughing wantonly. For some reason, the legs that stopped seemed to be attracted by a magic force, and he stepped into the drunken joy house. He had never been to such a place before. This was the first time. Inside, there were all kinds of women dressed in revealing clothes. Compared with the restraint and poetry writing in the daytime, they seemed to be a lot bolder at night. They didn't wear much clothes, only covering their private parts. Their arms were around the men next to them. Their red lips, snow-white skin. Every part made one's imagination run wild. Shangguan Yu's eyes glanced at each other. At this time, an old mother who was over her middle age and still dressed beautifully came towards him. She couldn't hide the amazement in her eyes. She didn't expect such an outstanding child to come to her place in the middle of the night. "Young master, are you lonely at night and come to our drunken joy house to have fun?" Shangguan Yu did not answer. The old mother was also a sharp-eyed person. Just by looking at his outstanding temperament and expensive clothes, she knew that he was definitely a young master of an aristocratic family. Qiu Yin is a new girl that our drunken joy brothel has recruited. To be honest, she has not been married yet. 3 days later, we are planning to auction her. Since young master is here, then I'll make the decision on my own and let this girl serve you first. How about it? Shangguan Yu did not refuse, but took out a large ingot of silver from his sleeve and gave it to her. When the old mother saw that he was so generous, she was glad that she was right. She happily took the silver and said, "Young master, please come with me. I will lead you to your room." Shangguan Yu followed her upstairs. The lively and fragrant room was filled with an ambiguous atmosphere. Even the incense stimulated the body's most instinctive desire. Red curtains, red bed. It was an alluring fragrance. Shangguan Yu didn't know why he was here. As long as he thought of what Shuangshi had said to him today, he couldn't catch his breath. The suffocating pain seemed to dissipate a lot as he entered the room. Chapter 240. Soon, the door was pushed open, and a beautiful woman shyly walked in. She was dressed in a pink gauze, and her thin waist could be grasped by a single hand. If a large hand exerted force, it would be easily crushed. Her lips were red, her teeth were white, and her eyebrows were arched like willow leaves. Especially that pink little mouth. It could simply be described as tender and alluring. Compared with the arrogant and domineering Shen Yueji, she seemed to be full of the unique charm of a woman. "Young master." She thought her mother was lying to her, saying that it was a handsome young man. She didn't believe it and refused to come. However, she didn't expect that the young master in front of her was really as handsome as a celestial being. Her heart was beating fast. The women who came here to serve the guests were not chosen by her, but it was her first time after all. Which woman didn't want to give her first time to a man she liked? If she could give her first night to him, Qiu Yin thought of what was about to happen and her face turned red. She hurriedly walked to the tea table and poured 2 cups of wine. Then, she leisurely walked towards the handsome young man sitting on the bed. "Young master, I'm Qiu Yin. Here's a toast to you." Shangguan Yu didn't need to look down to know that there was something in the wine. All the guests who came here knew what would happen when they entered this room, so every place in this room was prepared for the guests. Shangguan Yu stared at her for a long time without hiding his eyes. Qiu Yin blushed and lowered her head, trying to make herself say something bold. "Young master, don't worry. Later on the bed, I'll let you see enough." Such bold words made Shangguan Yu's eyes dim. He took the wine from her white fingers and drank it in one gulp. Seeing that he had drunk the wine, Qiu Yin also drank the wine in one gulp. She put down the wine cup and slowly moved her body along the man's thigh. A pair of warm hands slowly moved up from his thigh. "Young master, let me serve you from now on." Shangguan Yu did not move, nor did he resist. He just let her hold him, let her hands casually fan the flames on his body, like a statue. Maybe this was what Shen Yueji wanted. Perhaps this was the kind of life he should have. He should learn from other men and have 3 wives and 4 concubines. After he had enough of the life in the mansion, he would come to the brothel to seek pleasure and repeat the cycle. His heart turned cold as he allowed the woman to touch him all over. She wrapped her body around him like a loach, and her soft little hands went through his clothes, slithering into his body and climbing up his masculinity. He was startled. Xiao Yin blushed and pushed the man onto the bed. She took off her clothes. The outer cover was just a symbol of pretense and modesty, but she was really not wearing a single inch inside. The young girl's delicate body was as exquisite as a pearl. Any man who saw her would probably be unable to restrain himself. However, Shang Guanyu's eyes were as calm as still water. Even the thing in Xiao Yan's hand did not seem to be moved by her at all. She was unwilling to give up. Her almond-shaped eyes were filled with tears. "Young master, do you think that I feel that I can't make you feel comfortable?" Shang Guanyu gently raised his hand and gently wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. He turned over and pressed her under his body. Xiao Yin couldn't hide the joy on her face. She hurriedly took off his clothes. His robe was easily taken off by her. Shang Guanyu looked down at her delicate mouth, and his Adam's apple moved slightly. Chapter 241. Compared with the concubines and wives of the so-called manners, they were indeed not as bold as the women in the brothel. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many men who would abandon their beautiful wives and family members at home and still come to the brothel to seek pleasure. It was all because they would never be able to experience what it meant to be truly seductive when it came to their own women. They would rather die than live. Shang Guanyu stared at the girl's fragrant lips in a daze. However, at the moment when her lips were about to touch his, the unfamiliar woman's breath and Shen Yueji's arrogant and domineering face appeared in his mind. Bursts of nausea made him turn his head away and throw the woman out of the bed. Bang! A loud sound rang out. Xiao Yan's delicate body fell to the ground with a muffled groan. Her fair and tender body immediately turned red when she fell to the ground. She immediately burst into tears because of the pain. Puzzled and distressed, she looked at the indifferent man who was elegantly dressing himself on the bed. His every movement revealed a noble demeanor. "Young master." Why? She felt so wrong that tears rolled down her cheeks one after another. Shang Guanyu did not look at her. He just took her clothes and put them on her. Then, he took out a large ingot of silver from the elegant robe and gave it to her. Before leaving, he only said, "You are not her." Walking out of the Drunken Joy building, Shang Guanyu did not look back again. In the cold wind and the dark night, he seemed to have recovered some of his senses as the cold wind blew on his face. There was a trace of indelible coldness on his warm, thin lips, and even his dark eyes were like owls. Shen Yueji's beautiful face appeared in front of him again. Shang Guanyu laughed at himself. "Jier, do you know? Apart from you, I don't have the slightest interest in other women. How can I marry someone else?" Even though he had forced himself to touch that woman just now, from the moment that woman entered the room, or from the moment he saw the words Drunken Joy House, his heart was already very conflicted. Especially when that woman boldly leaned her body against his leg. He wanted to kill her, but he still endured it. He endured it with great difficulty, not even daring to move, because he was afraid that if he moved even the slightest bit, in the next second, the one lying on the ground would be a cold corpse. He sighed silently, raised his head, and looked at the cold moon hanging high in the sky. "Jier, you've always disliked weak men. I've always been working hard to make myself stronger. I gave up my studies for martial arts. No matter how much suffering I've endured, as long as I think about being able to protect you in the future and stand by your side, I feel that everything I've done is worth it. But you never gave me a chance. Not even now." Now, he just wanted to silently guard and protect her. Even if he could not get a response from her, he was willing to do so, but she even wanted to take back this little bit. General's mansion compared to the coldness of the night. The general's mansion at this moment was bustling, as usual. Emma Wushang sat on the main seat, and on his right sat old General Shun Shun, whose face was red from drinking. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.